Hi everyone, I'm currently finishing up my degree, but thought I'd get a devlog out on the most recent additions to Lumbermill, a factory builder and management game set deep in the forest. This is a big one, and I'm sure many of you will be pleased to see the features I've been working on. In the last devlog, I added an underground layer to the game. The forest lifts away to reveal rocks and dirt. The most common guess for this layer was that it would be used for some kind of mining mechanic. While that could be cool, this game is about building a lumber mill, and something that has always been missing is power. I've added 2 entire power systems in fact, so let's get into it. I set up the basic files for the back end of the power systems before creating some placeholder graphics for the first of these systems, electrical power. Just squares for now while I get everything working. Before I get too deep into development, I should probably explain how all this will work. In the electrical system, generators produce electricity, which is then distributed by the transformers. You link generators to transformers by laying cables underground. There are some more details, but we'll get into those in a bit. I set up the prefab for a simple type of generator, solar panels. As you can see here, when I construct a generator on the forest layer, another terminal object is also constructed directly underneath. This is what you'll connect cables to. Next up, it's transformers. I made more placeholder art for them before setting up the prefab in Unity. I also added a placeholder power cable, and after a bit of work got the game to recognize circuits between the terminals. What you can see here is the game counting the number of power sources in a circuit. This was just a way of checking everything was working correctly. Next, I needed a way to fairly distribute power between all the transformers in a circuit, and let me tell you, this wasn't as simple as it sounds. I ended up doing the majority of the planning for this on paper, as I find it way easier to concentrate on algorithms this way before moving to actual code. Without diving too deeply into the details, the power from all the generators is first pooled and shared equally. The transformers then return any surplus power they don't need back into the circuit. This is then redistributed wherever in the circuit it's needed most, or returned to the generators and counted as unused supply. As you can see here, there are 3 separate circuits supplying power to the conveyor belts, and each one is contributing a fair share of the power to the conveyors. When I remove circuits from the conveyors, the power usage for the other circuits increases to compensate. I then added a check to the code to make sure objects only move in the factory system if it has power. And as you can see here, the conveyors only work if they're fully powered. At that point, I could move on from coding to make a control panel for generators. This shows some key information about the generator, such as how much supply it can provide and how much is actually utilized. Factory chains of different lengths use different amounts of power, so you'll need to scale your power system with the factory. The inconsistent motion on the bottom conveyor is down to the conveyor speed variation I was messing around with last devlog. It was an experiment worth trying, but has now been removed as it was problematic for obvious reasons. The final step before I moved on to the second power system was to draw some art for the solar panels. These, along with the rest of the electrical power system, are going to be a late game feature, as I'd like there to be some sense of technological progression over the course of the game. After quite a bit of adjustment, I arrived at this design. They certainly stand out, but I think they look pretty cool when lined up as they would in real life. Time for a break in development, so I ended up in the garden helping my dad build a deck. I wish I could say the timber knowledge I've gained from developing this game helped, but I'm not sure it did. Got pretty good at screwing down decking though. So amongst that and having great fun revising for finals, I carried on with the second power system. I wanted something a little more old school to suit the old Canadian sawmill vibe I'm going for, and started work on steam power. This will work a little differently to electrical power. Water pumps draw water from underground aquifers. Pipes connect these to boilers, which generate steam, which in turn powers a steam engine that does a similar job to a transformer, albeit with a smaller range and power capacity. This is the early game power system, before electrical power has been researched. First, I needed to generate underground lakes, or aquifers. The approach for this was to use perlin noise. Here I'm just checking the perlin noise algorithm is working as expected, before setting a threshold value for lakes to be generated. If the value at a tile is above a threshold, it becomes a lake tile. If it's below, it remains as dirt or rock. Next, I drew some pipes. There will be 2 types of piping for steam and water, just so you know what part of the steam power system you're constructing at any given time. I got those sprites sliced into individual images, then created a boiler with an inlet and outlet for water and steam respectively. Next, I created an algorithm for smoothing the edges of the lakes. The blocky shapes created by the tile system don't look great, and there wasn't a suitable algorithm I could find online for this. As always, I ran through it on paper to make sure it worked as expected before going in and coding it in Unity. I made some placeholder sprites for the lake just to test the shape generation. Then I set up the prefab for aquifer tiles in Unity. At first there were some weird cases, but after a bit of tweaking I got that algorithm working nicely. It just smooths off the edge of the lakes a bit while staying true to the tile system. With that working, it was time to create some actual sprites for the lake. This took a bunch of attempts with totally different approaches. At first I created tiles with edge shadows built into them. When I went to Unity to test this, it looked very messy, and it turns out there are loads of different variations to consider when rendering lake edges in isometric. I spent quite a long time trying to think of a way to code this without creating a messy system, and eventually decided to just scrap the whole idea and go with something else entirely. The ground tiles themselves would be replaced wherever there was a lake edge, with a grayscale gradient which mixes with a transparent lake tile to indicate depth. This is the proof of concept I made before committing to making the actual tiles. After a bit of adjustment, I got the holes in the ground generating correctly. They look a bit strange without the water, but wanted to make sure they were correct before heading on to drawing the water tiles. A benefit of the system is I can easily adjust the watercolor. I eventually decided to go with a sort of teal, which I think creates a really cool atmosphere for the underground. With more work yet to do on the system, I created the steam engine, and thankfully the power systems share the same code for their core functions. That means I could just switch the circuit type to steam for the steam engine so that it connects to just steam pipes. With that, the steam system works, although I need a way to add fuel to the boiler. My current plan is to allow employees to start the machine by hand before connecting it to a conveyor and storage building to automate the fueling process with chopped wood. I'll also be creating sprites to differentiate between the steam pipes and water pipes. The last load of work I did for this devlog was draw some sprites. I drew the transformer first, a metal frame with copper coils on top. To illustrate that the transformer is fully powered, I created an animation, eventually settling on this rising electricity animation after a bunch of iterations. I also finished off the electrical power objects I've created so far, with the first being the terminal that's created under generators and transformers. This is just a bunch of cables being routed upwards to the surface. I also created the power cables as I was on a bit of a roll with the pixel art. So that's it so far for the power system. 2 ways to power your machines. One that's pretty old school and one that's a bit more scalable for bigger factories. If you have any ideas of what else can be added to the power system or other uses for the power system, I'd love to hear all of your suggestions in the comments. Speaking of Steam, the game is available for wishlisting on Steam. Every wishlist really helps me out, as the more I get, the more exposure I get on release, so massively appreciate every wishlist I get. You can also follow me on Twitter or join the game's fast-growing Discord, both linked below. If you'd like to support the development of the game, I have a Patreon with a bunch of Lumbermill related rewards. Special thanks for this video, of course, go to my patrons. In particular, I'd like to thank Ismail, Capival, Nova, Pepper Trollman, Sheshpesh, Julian, Phil, Ethan Hart, Alex, Glenn Lamberts, and Cameron Wolf. That's all for this week. If you'd like to see more, do remember to subscribe, and I shall see you next time. Cheers for watching.